So now this is, together with the earlier recitations, this makes a complete salam. Normally the Wahhabis, they said, this I explained in the yesterday's meeting, that Salawat Ibrahimiyya, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid wa barik ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin innaka Hamidum Majid. That is the best salawat. There is no other salawat than this. This is what they sometimes argue. They tell you that this is the best salawat because it is inside the prayer, the 5 times fard prayer itself, it is there. So there is the best salawat. No, not necessarily. It is the salawat. It is a good salawat. Yes, we agree. But there is no salam. There is no salam in this Salawat Ibrahimiyya. Allahumma salli is there, Barik is there, but there is no salam. Without that salam, that salawat has become incomplete. Salawat has become incomplete because there is no salam. Then am I saying that Salawat Ibrahimiyya, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammadin barik ala Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ali Ibrahim is not a salawat? It is not a good salawat? No. It is complete only when you say as-salam in at-tahiyyat al-mubarakat as-salawat at-tayyibat lillahi. As-salamu alayka ayyuhan nabi. We already said as-salam there. That salam is already been said. So this doesn't require a salam in here. So combining that salam and this salawat, it makes a complete salawat. Then it is a bit. But they, our Wahhabis, are not saying that. They say, well, Salat Ibrahimiyya is enough. Where is the salam? So this you should explain in reciting salawat, other salawat, what is the advantage they get. This is how you should explain to the people. When you explain things to the people, you should explain to them what is the advantage for them in doing so. So this Saman is like this. Once upon a time, there was a time when Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or anybody said, do this, they immediately did it without questioning. Immediately it was done. Amanna sallamna. Sami'na munadiyan yunadina bil iman. We heard somebody bring iman, and we came into iman. Without even asking a question, what is Allah, who is Allah, what is his capacities. Nothing. They just made iman. They are the highest of the iman. But now a time has come that we are asking what is what, when, what are you, where are you, where are you, why are you, how are you. All these questions are being asked, only then you will believe. Yes, there is also iman, but it is not the highest of the iman. Like Abu Bakr Siddiq, when he made iman, he didn't ask any question. When they said, hey, your friend Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Muhammad, he is saying that he is Nabi, he said so, then it is correct. Nothing asked, immediately it is accepted. Umar who became Muslim. How did he become a Muslim? He was angry. He wanted to cut the head of the Prophet ﷺ to the sword. He went. And somebody stopped him and said, where are you going? He said, I am going to cut the head of it. What are you going to cut his head? Your own brother, sister, their brother-in-law, they are practicing Islam. He got angry. He went there to punish them. He heard a Quran ayat, Surah Taha, being recited, the first ayat. And after hearing that and understanding the meaning, he became Muslim. Now this is also Iman. But is this Iman the same degree of Iman with the Iman of Abu Bakr Siddiq who became Muslim without asking a question, without analyzing, without making sure that this is correct? Definitely not. So our Sunnat wal Jamaat people from the time onwards, long time onwards, have been teaching us, don't ask questions, just do it, you will get tawab. So we were trained in that way for generations and generations. We did not ask questions, we did it. Now, the people who propagate confusion to make their power stand for long, to make their governments last for long, they are putting the people, bribing them to create confusion among the public. It is they who are saying, ask a question. Because they know very well what is our weak point. We don't ask question, we believe like that. But actually there is our strong point. So if you ask a question to a Sunnah Jamaat Ulad, where is the proof? They will not be able to answer. So use that tactics to tell them that your Sunnah wal Jamaat is wrong. So such a state of trend has come now. They will start asking questions, where? Why? What? When all these questions will come. Only to deny, bring down the level of Iman without asking questions to make Iman the highest of Iman. Now, this time has come, you will believe only when you will ask questions and the questions are answered, you will believe. It is not haram, but definitely it is not the highest of the Iman. So you have to be prepared when somebody asks a question to give them a reply. Not just because you should reply them, but you should at least understand that what you are doing is correct. That is the highest of Iman, to know. Those who know and those who do not know, do you think they are both equal? They are not at all. Now, what are the challenges that are facing us is the media from the other side. They are making, talking, showing things that is most appealing to the brain. All their words will be logic, they will sound realistic, and above all, they will be all easy to practice. Whatever the Sunnat wal Jamaat ulamas have taught us sometimes would be, we will feel that it is difficult. Rather, if you follow what these Wahhabis teach you, it is very easy to adopt. They will also quote the Hadith and Quran. They say religion is not hard. Religion is very easy to follow. You follow it. So all this kind of mellowing down the existing norms, bringing down the difficulties, the so-called difficulties, and making it easy is one method being followed by the assailants on the Sunnat wal Jama'at. So these are the enemies that are facing us. The internal enemies I told you are anger, envy, and lies, falsehood, hypocrisy. The external enemies are these. The questioning of the authority is one of the external enemies to the Iman. Then there is the excessive money, the excessive wealth is also enemy to the Iman. As man becomes rich and rich and rich, the level of his fear for Allah keeps on going down. I am saying not 100%, majority of these people who are very wealthy and rich are having less Iman than those who are poor. Bada al-Islam ghariba wa sayaudu kama bada. Islam started with poor people. Although the first confessed to Islam was Abu Bakr Siddiq, who was a rich man. The first to convert to Islam from a woman was Khadija, she was a rich lady. Although Islam started as with rich people, the two rich people. Rasulullah said, Bada al-Islam ghariba. Islam started only with poor people. Like Bilal, he was a slave. Sumayya, all that. So many people who were left, they laid down their lives. The early stages of the Islam, by the torture of the mushriks and kafir, and all these people were poor people. So Islam started with poor, and it was a Yahud Gamapada. It will again go to that level when only poor people will remain Islam and rich people will go out of Islam. That a state will come, a day will come, now will that. I don't think we will live that long to see. So a state will come, only poor people will be there. So the money, the wealth as it goes on is one of the dangers of Iman if you don't control it properly. If the money controls you, then your Iman becomes weak. If you control the money, then your Iman becomes very strong. Same like that is the excessive knowledge, excessive worldly knowledge is also a danger to the Iman. So let your children study. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, Talabul ilmi faridatun ala kulli musliman wa muslima. Learning is a compulsory thing on both men and women. Yes, let them learn. But let them learn only what is necessary. If you make them learn things that do not benefit them, then they will go astray. That is also against the Iman. That is why the Sunnat wal Jama'at ulamas taught us when we make a dua, ilman nafi'a, Ya Allah, give us useful knowledge. Don't give me useless knowledge. Don't give me a knowledge that will take me astray. Don't give me a knowledge that will take me astray. And by that means, there are people with very high knowledge and still, as their knowledge increases, they are very pious also. The other way around. When I am saying pious, I am not saying piety towards Allah only. A piety towards a non-God. You see, the Arabs, I heard one of the Arabs say about the Indian scientists who are sending the payloads into the orbit, rockets. Now there was SLV something was launched. They are so intelligent. They are competing with the West, with the Europe, with France, with the Russians, with the Americans. They are able to send rockets into the orbit. Such intelligent people, the Indian scientists. About them, I heard one of the Arabs in one of the majlis a few months back, maybe a year back, told me, يرسلون الأبقار ويبعدون يرسلون الأقمار ويعبدون الأبقار. What a beautiful couplet it was. They are sending يرسلون الأقمار. They are sending satellites and worshipping the cow. The so high advanced people, their brain tells them that science is what? يرسلون الأقمار. They are sending satellites ويعبدون الأبقار. And at the same time they are worshipping the cow. This is the exact sentence one of the Arabs was quoting to citing and laughing. Maybe he read it somewhere. But that was a very nice eye-opener. So I am saying sometimes, so even those people who send satellites in scientism, how they are still believing in a cow, that cow is the God. So sometimes, always there are exceptions. Sometimes even high religion, high education will also tend to piety. But generally speaking, high education will not tend to piety. See to it that our children get the right education that is good for them. So excessive power again. Somebody has got an excessive power. Whatever he said is the law. Whatever he does is obeyed. There is no question asked. If such an excessive power is given to somebody, then also Iman will be lost. You can give the examples of Fir'aun, Qarun, Haman, but they are all before the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and they were very massive rulers. I am talking about the modern days, the modern world. The Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, he had excessive powers. How many Muslims he killed? The Ataturk, Kamal Pasha of Turkey, how many Muslims he killed? How did they change the entire country? The entire country, how did they change? When Gamal Abdel Nasser wanted to make Egypt, wanted to westernize Egypt, what did he do? The government, his government, they brought the suit, the coat, the pant, the western dress, and hundreds of them, thousands of them were made in different sizes, and they were made to be sold on the platforms. They were much cheaper than the traditional dishdasha, the kandura, the dishdasha, the soup, what in different places they call by different names. The sunnat, the dress of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if it costs a common man to stitch it for 10 guinea, a guinea is the Egyptian pound. This entire suit was sold for as less as 2 guineas, 3 guineas. So what would a poor fellow will do? And if the country is full of poor people, what would they do? Everybody opted for the suit, everybody took it, and everybody became westernized in their dress as a first step. In Syria also, some time back, now Hafiz Azhar is not there anymore, compulsory co-education was brought in. You cannot have a school especially for boys and girls. You have to have a compulsory co-education. So corrupting the Islamic thoughts and in their thinking of westernizing them took place. Ataturk did the same thing. In Turkey was called as the sick man of Europe. How did they make it develop in his own thought? He did everything that will please the Western Christians. Just like now, some of the Arab countries are doing everything to please their Western masters. Their Jews, the Jewish masters and the Christian masters, whatever would please them, they are doing now. They are even sending fatwas against those who are agitating against the film, against Islam, against the Prophet. See, what a power mongers, how far they have gone away from the Islam and from the Iman. So they will do anything to please their Western Christian and Jewish bosses who put them on power as a puppet with the help of the local agents, the British espionage, how they used these people to rebel against the Ottoman Turks. You read history, it's very clear. It was the Turks who were levying tax in their own countries, bringing money to this area, and they were protecting Makkah and Medina. There was nothing in Makkah and Medina. Those such people, selfless people, have been thrown out. Why? Because there was Khilafat movement. The whole worldwide British government had their countries, including the Sri Lanka, India, Burma, Malaysia, Singapore, China, Hong Kong. They're all their colonies. So all Muslims living in these countries waged war against the British, saying that there is a Khilafat movement, we will support only the Khalifa, that is the Turki rulers, Sultan. So to reduce their power, they have to bring somebody who will take charge of Makkah and Medina and who will be their puppets so that they can control the entire Muslim world. That was the strategy they made. And by God, Allah's will, although we don't like it, we have to agree with Allah's will, they succeeded in doing it. So to please their Western masters, they will do anything, they do everything to knowingly but not unknowingly their meanings of the Quran. They know very well. They have to protect their government. Some time back, when I say some time back, say about 800 years back, maybe 700 years back, there was Hajjaj bin Yusuf, a caliph of Islam. He had a soldier, a very big general by name Muhammad Qasim. That Muhammad Qasim was sent to the Indian continent, subcontinent, to capture the people who were sacrificing the Muslims. Their temples had the habit of giving human sacrifice. They will not give their own people from their own religion. So if they will kill somebody who is from the other religion, so the Muslims were sacrificed. So Muhammad bin Qasim, he came and first he captured the Sindh province, that is in the north of today's Pakistan. That is how those people became Muslims in the Pakistani area. He was sent there to capture, and he captured and he established Islam there. So when he came, the Muslims were being slaughtered, they were being given as an offering to the Hindu gods. Same case was with King Mahmud of Ghaznavi. He also came to India 16 times. He brought his army to fight the Somanathapuram temple, to destroy it because they were cutting the heads of the Muslims as a human sacrifice. But today's history, what does it say? It says he came, there was gold ornaments in the Somanath temple, so he came all the way to steal and rob the gold ornaments from the Somanath temple. A man will come there to steal once, if he is caught, maybe after some time he tries his luck again, he is caught again. Do you think he will come there for the third time to rob and steal? He will not come. He came 15 times, the 16th time he succeeded. He came 15 times. You think that he came to rob? He didn't come to rob. He came to punish that so-called God that asks the blood of the Muslims. So piety is one that will make you do anything. But what piety is this? So in that case, when he came and conquered the Sindh province, there was a king whom he had to defeat. That king, I have to go back a little into the prior history to before what happened when Muhammad Qasim came to Sindh. This province was ruled by a Hindu ruler, a big king. He had a son. He will become the king afterwards. When he was about 7 years, 8 years, 5 years, 10 years old boy, the king gave birth to another girl, a princess this time. The soothsayers, the Doshiyakaran, those people, Shastrakaran, they predicted that this girl is a lucky girl. One who is going to marry this girl will rule this province. This is what the soothsayers, the magicians of that Hindu ruler king declared. King was happy that his son-in-law is going to be the ruler. He is a bigger ruler than himself. He is a powerful person going there himself. He is very happy that his daughter will be the queen. But his brother was not happy. He knows if his brother-in-law is going to be a bigger king than him, he can't take rest. It means his power will be reduced. As he grew, his thought was growing with him that how to solve the problem. The king knew